Let's begin with the foundations. Christopher Nolan. This is another lecture. I am Alexei. Thank you for joining us. Today we will examine the filmmaker whose blockbusters made room for braided timelines, moral ambiguity, and very large cameras.
Hi, I'm Priyanka. I help organize the notes and, ask the questions many of us have when the timelines start crossing.
To frame our discussion, Christopher Edward Nolan is a British and American filmmaker whose work couples commercial scale with intricate structure. Think of him, if you will, as a modern storyteller who mixes a detective's notebook with a fireworks display. There is mystery to parse and spectacle to feel, and the two are engineered to reinforce one another rather than compete.
So, maybe the best place to begin is with the technical pieces we keep hearing about. What does it actually mean when people say IMAX 70mm or practical effects? And why does it matter for Nolan specifically?
It's important to understand definitions first. IMAX 70mm refers to a large film gauge and camera system that records far more visual information per frame than standard formats. In simpler terms, it yields images of exceptional clarity and scale on giant screens. Practical effects are physical in-camera methods, such as miniatures, stunts, gimbaled sets, and controlled pyrotechnics, rather than computer-generated imagery inserted later. Nolan privileges these because physical causality is legible to our eyes. We intuit mass, friction, and light, which stabilizes our comprehension when the narrative itself is bent or inverted. As for narrative complexity, we observe devices like reverse chronology, nested layers, or cross-cut timescales. Memento uses anterograde amnesia as a structural engine, while Dunkirk arranges land, sea, and air on different temporal clocks that converge. On the business side, terms like theatrical window refer to the exclusive period when a film plays only in cinemas. First dollar gross denotes a share of revenue from the very first ticket sold. And a blackout period is a promise from a distributor not to crowd a release with competing titles. These seemingly dry parameters shape what kinds of ambitious films get made and how audiences encounter them.
That helps. So yeah, moving on. Why should we care beyond the tech? What are the stakes for cinema and for us as viewers?
Relevance is twofold. First, Nolan demonstrated that original, formally ambitious films can thrive at blockbuster scale. Inception, for example, convinced studios that audiences would invest in layered premises when the craft is precise. Second, his Batman cycle recalibrated the tone and plausibility of superhero cinema for a generation. And The Dark Knight's omission from Best Picture catalyzed an Academy rule change, expanding the field of nominees in 2010. Add to this his public advocacy for film preservation and theatrical exclusivity, and we see a single career shaping aesthetics, industry policy, and archival practice.
Can we maybe now look at the basics? Quick facts and the path from the early days to now.
Certainly. Born in London in 1970 to a British father and an American mother, Nolan holds dual citizenship and grew up between Highgate and Evanston. He began filming at 7, even cheekily refilming Apollo launch footage off a screen sent by an uncle who worked on guidance systems. That curiosity for engineering and image never left. He studied English literature at University College London, selected precisely because UCL had Steenbeck editing benches and 16mm cameras. With Emma Thomas, whom he met there and later married, he screened 35mm prints during term to fund their own summer productions. After shorts like Doodlebug, he made Following in 1998 for roughly £3,000, shot on weekends with rehearsals so tight the first or second take would do. That discipline foreshadowed everything to come. Memento arrived in 2000, adapted from Jonathan Nolan's concept, and its reverse structure turned a modest budget into a world conversation. It was the breakthrough. Studiocraft followed with Insomnia in 2002. Batman Begins in 2005 revived a faltering franchise with grounded design and minimal CGI. The Dark Knight in 2008 pioneered extensive IMAX camera use, crossed $1 billion, and reshaped awards discourse. Inception in 2010 proved that an original multi-layer blockbuster could win both audiences and Oscars. The Dark Knight Rises concluded the trilogy in 2012. Interstellar in 2014 married Kip Thorne's physics to family stakes. Dunkirk in 2017, with its triptych time scheme and minimal dialogue, became the highest-grossing World War II film and earned his first Best Director nomination. Tenet opened theaters in 2020 amid the pandemic, and the ensuing disagreement over day and date strategies precipitated his departure from Warner Brothers. The Universal chapter begins with Oppenheimer in 2023, secured under extraordinary terms: total creative control, a long theatrical window, and first dollar participation. It won Best Director and Best Picture. He was knighted in 2024, elected President of the Directors Guild of America in 2025, and in 2026 released The Odyssey, his most expensive production to date, and his first shot entirely on IMAX 70mm, reframing Homer through themes of memory and identity. Across the filmography, the global box office surpasses $6 billion. 3 titles have entered the National Film Registry, and his company Syncope with Emma Thomas remains the operational base for both originals and select collaborations.
It makes me wonder about the craft choices, the rotating hallway in Inception, the non-CGI Trinity imagery in Oppenheimer, even the real plane in Tenet. Is that just preference? Or is there a deeper logic?
There is a deep logic. When narratives question memory and time, it is useful for the physics on screen to be incontestable. A rotating set is a rotating set, and the actor's balance is not pretending to an algorithm. This stabilizes the viewer's inference making. Mathematically, you hold one variable constant, the ontology of the image, so you can explore variance in another, the chronology of the story. A brief personal note. As someone who spends days proving lemmas, I find comfort in his method. Rehearsal is like pre-computing. Practical effects are like constructing a physical model before solving the differential equation. We reduce unknowns so the remaining unknowns become intelligible. Moving forward, let us pose 3 big questions to organize what we know and equally what remains open.
So first, a historical one. People say The Dark Knight changed the Oscars. What was the actual significance, and how do we separate myth from the record?
The record is clear. The Dark Knight was a critical and commercial event in 2008, yet it did not receive a Best Picture nomination. The ensuing discourse revealed a gap between popular esteem and awards protocols. In 2010, the Academy expanded the Best Picture field, a reform widely linked to that omission. It is worth noting that causality in institutions is complex. Nevertheless, the timing and internal acknowledgments point to The Dark Knight as a primary catalyst.
And did that change ripple into which films could be nominated later? Can we point to examples that probably benefited?
Yes. After expansion, we observe a broader genre spectrum among nominees. Inception in 2010, Mad Max Fury Road in 2015, Black Panther in 2018, Joker in 2019, Dune in 2021, and Top Gun Maverick in 2022 illustrate how technically muscular, audience-facing cinema could credibly occupy the same ballot space as intimate dramas. While each case has its own artistic merits, the structural expansion created room for them to be considered without zero-sum displacement.
That clarifies it. Building on that, a counterfactual. If Nolan had not left Warner Brothers after the day and date controversy, what might have happened to Oppenheimer and The Odyssey, and to the industry conversation?
Counterfactuals are provisional, but we can model incentives. At Universal, Oppenheimer secured unusually favorable terms. Total creative control, a long theatrical window, first dollar gross, and a release blackout around it. The film approached $1 billion and won the top Oscars. Had he stayed at Warner Brothers amid a shift toward streaming simultaneity, it is plausible those terms would have been less protective of theatrical exclusivity, which could have altered marketing cadence, premium format access, and even perceived event status. As for The Odyssey, a full IMAX 70mm production at $250 million suggests a studio willing to underwrite unprecedented logistics. Absent the Universal leverage moment, the same scale might have faced greater friction or a slower green light. None of this is destiny. It is simply the topology of decision-making under different contracts.
And the broader implications? Would the theatrical versus streaming debate look different if he had stayed?
To answer simply, his departure created a high-profile case study proving that a director could migrate, negotiate, and succeed with theatrical first terms after the pandemic. If he had stayed, the debate would still exist. But one vivid data point would be missing. Fewer studios might have risked extended windows for original or idea-driven films. In other words, his move did not settle the argument, but it shifted the feasible set for others.
Okay, third, the still open question. Given his commitment to cinemas, what is the future of theatrical and streaming living together? And does technology change that equilibrium?
We observe a dynamic compromise in progress. Theatrical remains unmatched for large format immersion, particularly with IMAX laser projection and 70mm prints. Streaming provides access, long-tail discovery, and convenience. The unresolved questions are empirical. How long must windows be to preserve event status without starving later audiences? Which films demonstrably gain from premium presentation, and which are indifferent? How do we quantify the marketing value of scarcity? Technologically, exhibition will likely integrate more high-contrast projection, improved sound, and seat-based transducers, while production will continue to blend practical effects with selective digital workflows. LED volumes, computational color pipelines, and even assistive AI tools will expand. But audience tolerance for artificiality has limits. We need better research on preference elasticity by age cohort and region, and longitudinal studies on how one premium experience alters future willingness to pay.
Maybe it's just me, but I keep thinking of Dunkirk. Minimal dialogue, very physical imagery, and people still went back multiple times. Does that suggest where the theatrical advantage really lives?
Arguably, yes. When form and scale are indivisible from meaning, the cinema becomes not merely a container, but an instrument. Nolan's approach uses that instrument fluently, that more than nostalgia is the sustainable case for theaters. To summarize, Christopher Nolan is a British-American filmmaker who fused complex narrative design with large-scale, physically grounded craft. We examined 3 questions. First, the historical impact of The Dark Knight on the Academy's expanded Best Picture field. Second, the counterfactual of remaining at Warner Brothers and how Universal's terms likely shaped Oppenheimer and The Odyssey. Third, the still active debate about theatrical and streaming, and the technological variables that may tilt that balance. For those inclined to dig deeper, study the evolution of IMAX technology, both film-based 70mm and digital laser systems, and how they change storytelling choices. This then completes our present analysis. Thank you for listening. As always, read the footnotes. Life is easier when one does.
Thank you, Professor. That was helpful to think through, actually.